trying to find what happened to, that's not it. Okay. And of course that's me uploading. Okay, so I've got to repeat this again because this is actually a new video that's I glue all these 10-minute segments together. Okay, so this is what we're working on here. 2 minus the square root of 9i plus 1 minus the square root of negative 4. Did I say I? I didn't mean to say I there. So like I said, there's a couple different ways of doing this. We can actually go ahead and convert this over into standard form as a complex number, or we can leave it as it is and then at the very end convert it over. I don't know. What do we want to do here? So we'll go ahead and label this as 1. Back to 1 again. Alright, so we have 2 minus the square root of negative 9. And we're going to go ahead and put that in parentheses and then plus 1 minus the square root of negative 4. Square root of negative 4. Okay, so we have 2. We're going to drop the parentheses now. Alright, so what's going on here? Well, we could look at it like this, that there's a negative 1 in here times 9. Okay, because 9 times negative 1 is just negative 1. Plus 1 minus, let's look at this one here. So we have negative 1 times 4. Right, we can look at it that way. I should write equals here. So now what we're going to have is 2 minus. Now I'm going to break this up into two separate, it's the properties of radicals here, two separate radicals. Okay, see that? And then plus 1 minus the square root of negative 1 times 4. Now, do we remember what the square root of negative 1 is? Okay, remember, to find a solution to this equation, we had to invent a new number system, or actually we had to add on to the real number system. Remember, we said that I was equal to the square root of negative 1, and of course we square both sides. You'd have I squared is equal to negative 1. Okay, so I is equal to the square root of negative 1. So where there's a square root of negative 1, we can just replace that with I. However, we're going to write this in standard form. Now, what's the square root of 9? 3. And we'll just bring that 3 over to the left. Okay. Plus 1 minus, look at here, so the square root of 4 is 2. So 2i. We're just writing this in standard form. Now, of course, we want to go ahead and write the entire thing in standard form by adding the real parts. 2 plus 1 is 3. And then negative 3i minus 2i is minus 5i. Minus 5i. Okay. So that wasn't too bad. Let's take a look at another one. I think this is labeled as number 2 here. So we have 10 minus the square root of negative 4 plus 3 minus the square root of negative 25. Negative 25. So we have 10 minus the square root of negative 1. We're just going to go ahead and break that up like that. Plus 3 minus the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 25. Alright, so we have 10 minus, so the square root of 4 is, what's the square root of 4? Well, the square root of 4 is just 2. And of course, the square root of negative 1 is I. Plus 3 minus, so this should be 5i. You should get that. Now we add the real parts. 10 plus 3 is 13. Minus the imaginary parts, 5, 6, and 7i. right? 13 minus 7i. 13 minus 7i. I wonder, this is the third page here. No, it doesn't look like it. Okay. What are we doing? Number 3 now? I guess we can do that. We got time to do number 3, probably number 4 also. Okay, so number 3. We have 1 minus the square root of negative 36. And I'm not going to write the parentheses, but I think there's parentheses are in the problem. I am going to write the parentheses on this one for good reasons. 9 minus the square root of negative 81, okay, is equal to 1 minus the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 36 minus, now the reason I put a parentheses here because we're going to go ahead and distribute this negative across, all right, plus the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 81. So we have 1 minus, so the square root of 36 is just 6, and then this just becomes I minus 9, and then this is going to be plus square root of 81 is 9, and then that's going to be I. Alright, so getting it in our standard form, 1 minus 9 is going to be negative 8, and then negative 6i plus 9i is plus 3i, plus 3i. Okay, you know what, we're going to go ahead and do another one here at GoToMath. GoToMath.com. Okay, what do we got? Actually, let's label this up here 4. So we have 7 minus, we're going to multiply this time, negative 1 times 5 plus the square root of negative 9. Okay, the square root of negative 9. Now, I'm going to go ahead and convert these over. Instead of multiplying this stuff, I mean, there is something very important that you need to know about this, but I'm going to go ahead and convert these over now. So we have 7 minus I times 5 plus, and now let's look now. This is going to be the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 9. Square root of 9 is 3, and that should just be 3i. Okay, so at this point you should be able to go from here to here. Okay, especially on some simple ones here. So we have 7 times 5 is 35. 7 times 3 is 21i. Negative I times 5 is negative 5i. And negative I times 3i is going to be negative 3i squared. Negative 3i squared. So let's go ahead and get this in standard form. So remember, this I squared is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 3 is a positive 3. So we'll have 35 plus 3 plus, and then 21 minus 5 is, what is that, 16? Is that right, 16i? Okay, 16i. So this becomes 38 plus, in standard form, 16i. 38 plus 16i. I want to do a little side note here. And I'll ask the question, so is this the same thing? Right, you see that right there? What is this? This is negative 1 times negative 1. That's going to be a positive 1. So all that becomes the square root of positive 1, right? Which is just what? 1. Okay, but what is this? This is I times I. Right? If this is equal to I and this is equal to I times I is I squared. But we said that I squared was equal to negative 1. So be very careful if you leave these in this radical form here. You can't do that, right? Don't do that, okay? Or it will be wrong. You just go ahead and turn this into I, that into I, and I squared would be -1. So this is just a little side note here that could get you in big trouble if you're not careful. Okay, big trouble. Where are we at? Did we finish this problem? Yeah, we did. Okay, big trouble. And that was 4. So what are we doing here? Okay, I guess we're working on 5 next. Working on 5.